Hello, everyone. Welcome. I'm Lee Camp, joined by the always amazing Eleanor Goldfield. You understand it's also a podcast. You have to say something out loud. Otherwise, it sounds like you're just in a stack somewhere. Yeah, I just have you muted somehow, even though you're in the room.
No, we're in two separate subways.
Oh, okay. Gotcha. That's what a wall sounds like. So, welcome, everybody. Big show today. It's our last joint live stream for at least 2.5 weeks.
Not like ever.
No, I said at least 2.5 weeks.
There was a there was a pregnant pause there, though.
I will be in Tibet. However, Eleanor will likely
not be.
Wow, you're cutting off every sentence with your punchlines. Eleanor will likely be doing at least a few live streams while I am gone, so make sure and catch those. But we got a big show today. Thanks for being here. Please click thumbs up, click share, click all the good things that need to be clicked, and let's just do it. Let's just do the thing. Let's just do it. I'll start off with some good news. How about that? Why are you so mute today? It's kind of strange.
What are you talking about? You can't say I'm being mute and also cutting you off all of the time.
So you were cutting off my sentences, but also whenever I would start to turn to you, you just go.
What are you talking about? I was just about to start talking, and then you stepped on my words.
Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, let's start off with some good news about, and some fart noises, about Israel with the troops refusing to fight. An increasing number of Israeli troops. Some of them. An increasing number of Israeli troops are refusing to fight in Gaza and Lebanon. This is from CNN, which generally does pro-Israel garbage. So this is impressive. They've put this out there. More than 130 Israeli reservists have signed a letter refusing to fight in Gaza and Lebanon.
I can't help but wonder if this is CNN trying to make up for that piece they recently put out about how IDF soldiers are suffering from PTSD after running over people who are still alive with their tanks,
like intentionally running them
over. And how that's really hurt them as the drivers of the tanks. So I wonder if this is kind of like one of their ways to be like, and also there are people who don't want to drive over humans with tanks, so that's also a thing.
That's very true. This could be a response to the fact that CNN has put out a widely talked about horrific propaganda piece where they basically were like, it's really tough when you run people over just like intentionally and you're murdering a bunch of innocent people. It's really tough on you. Like, it's hard on your trigger warning. I ran some people over and it has triggered me. Like, it was the most bizarre, disgusting article.
It was really disgusting.
So maybe you're right. Maybe this is them trying to actually cover some real news.
Well, I think this is also, like there's this shift in how corporate media covers things. And I think what they're trying to do now is humanize Israelis, in particular Israeli soldiers, after they have been unable to control the flood of Israeli soldiers posting horrific videos of their own war crimes. Yeah. And so they can't stop the Israeli soldiers from doing that. So they have to try and find a way to humanize them in another way, because that's a prime way that you try to keep people on Israel's side and all this. Like, oh, well, they're struggling and they're having a hard time committing genocide. Like, it's a bummer. They had Saturday plans, and so they have to find a way to humanize them. And I think these articles are a way of trying to do that amidst a sea of all of the information to the contrary that shows that these are absolute monsters.
Yeah, doing listening to the commands that are monstrous commands of them. It is both. And so anyway, I just hope this is a flood and, gains strength in terms of Israeli children, and many of them are children, refusing to fight in this fucking horror show. Here is another update about Israel.
Somebody just posted.
Attacking.
Sorry. CNN is trying to humanize IDF, and IDF is trying to dehumanize IDF. Good point.
That's an excellent point.
It's a rough job CNN has. I don't envy them that.
Not only is Israel, this is from Jason Hickel, not only is Israel attacking UN peacekeepers in Lebanon, they have done it a dozen times. So this really refutes the whole, it was accidental that they hit these UN, and I hate the term peacekeepers, even though UN is not like a military, but it obviously is still a propaganda term. So UN employees will say, in Lebanon, it's not an accident when you do it a dozen times. And this is coming from the Financial Times, which is a pretty right-wing newspaper. Israel launched a dozen attacks on UN troops in Lebanon, says a leaked report. Because the UN doesn't really want all these details to get out, because they continue to like bend over backwards to do things for Israel, even as they're being attacked by Israel.
Well, and it's not only attacking them more than a dozen times, it's attacking them with white phosphorus, which is a war crime.
Yep.
It's a banned chemical weapon.
Yep.
So you're not only attacking them, you're obviously targeting them with something that you're well aware is a banned chemical weapon. So there's no accident from front to back to front in this whole situation.
Yeah, they've killed more UN employees than any conflict ever. And the UN continues to kind of say like piecemeal, like they don't come out strongly against them usually. And yeah, it's just war crime after war crime. And I asked on my Twitter, I asked everybody, is there, for all the pro-Israel defenders, is there a war crime that Israel would not commit? And I've yet to get an answer. Nobody seems to have an answer of something Israel would not do. Okay, so let's shift to the topic of BRICS for a few minutes. We covered it a little bit. I covered it a little bit yesterday. The big BRICS summit has just concluded. In a moment, I'm going to give you some of the New York Times propaganda about this BRICS summit. But here is a photo of the of many of the nations that were there. 159 out of 193 nations have signed up for the BRICS settlement system, financial settlement system, to compete against the SWIFT financial settlement system, which is controlled by the U.S. and the West. 159 out of 193 nations. That sounds like a lot of nations.
The most, I'd say. So this is reporting from Ben Norton over at Geopolitical Economy, which is a great website. And Ben Norton does amazing work. But basically, he writes at this BRICS meeting, Russia proposed the creation of a BRICS cross-border payment initiative, in which members of the organization will use their national currencies to trade, which of course also means that they don't have to like transfer things to dollars or to ruble or whatever. So it's a lot more considerate and conducive to these nations holding on to more of their money as opposed to losing it in exchange. They will likewise establish an alternative messaging infrastructure to circumvent SWIFT, which is what you were just mentioning. The SWIFT system is overseen by the US. So if you've ever done like international deposits or transfers or whatever, it's like the SWIFT code, you know, what's the SWIFT code? So,
and it's largely, the way it's most powerful is it's largely used for large international settlements of ridiculous amounts of funds. But yeah.
I mean, it's also used for like my not ridiculous amount of funds when I pay someone like $20 in, you know, France, but whatever. Also, yes. Yeah. And it's overseen by the United States. So who gets those transfer, you know, dollars and cents? That's the US. So this multi-currency system, which also speaks to what BRICS is trying to build, a multipolar world, right? They don't want to just replace the US dollar with, okay, now everybody has to trade in yuan or ruble or whatever. It's like, no, let's make it a true multipolar system. The multi-currency system would include new mechanisms, not only to de-dollarize trade, but also to encourage investment in the members of BRICS and other emerging markets and developing economies. Wow, that sounds like something you do when you're not just trying to have global hegemony. That's kind of cool.
I don't understand. Why aren't they controlling the world? Why is that not the aim?
I mean, what's funny here is that these nations will end up controlling the world in an economic sense, but no one nation will have that kind of power.
But right, so it's not a single control.
No. It's not. But it's a multipolar control that will basically de-dollarize the world, which that means that the US will plummet in terms of its power, both economically and politically, because the only control that the US really has right now is because it has economic power, right? It can just have sanctions on Venezuela and Cuba and, oh, I don't know, like a third of the world's countries. But if it doesn't have that economic power, the US imperial core cannot run at the rate that it's running now, which really is good news for the world. So
Yeah,
ultimately, I would call this a good news story.
We can't print as much money as we want, which means we can't spend $1 trillion a year on military and bombs, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, so there's also, you know, technology that they're working with, such as blockchain, so that things can be like decentralized. I mean, they'll still use their central banks, but it'll be decentralized in the sense that no one nation will have control over it. So this is one of those like stopgap measures. Like, this is not obviously the end of capitalism, but it is speaking to this shift away from a single imperial control of global economy. And that is, again, that is good news. And especially when you look at the fact that, I mean, whatever you want to say about Russia and China, I'm not here to have like the purity test conversation. There's a lot that I dislike about every nation state. China and Russia have been doing a lot of investments in Africa that, unlike what the US does, is actually trying to work with these nations to invest in them and help them build things like hospitals and roads and things like that. Of course, in exchange for having a cut of natural resources, but there is that important aspect of these African nations are then entering into these agreements as opposed to being forced into them
willingly
by U.S. hegemony.
And even CNN, even a CNN article recently, I mean, it was buried a little in the article, admitted that the idea that China is like buying up Africa and controlling it has been debunked.
Right.
That was even CNN.
Yeah. And someone just put this more succinctly than all of my chattering, which is, it will be cooperative, not manipulative. Thank you for putting that in a single sentence. I have a hard time with brevity.
Yeah, well, that's why we have you guys here. That's why you're here, to take what we say and shrink it down to 3 words. But so I want to read a little of the New York Times propaganda about this BRICS summit, which,
do you have to?
Oh, it's kind of hilarious though.
Okay.
Don't you? I feel like you learn a lot by breaking down propaganda, don't you?
Absolutely. It just gives me a headache. Makes me want to take a shower.
Fair point. So this is today in the New York Times, inside Putin's alternative reality, or alternate reality. Warm embraces and a veneer of normalcy, as if BRICS is just Putin and not...
And a lot of hugs, I guess.
100 nations, but they call it an alternate reality, which is kind of funny because really the U.S. is the one trying to portray an alternate reality now. We're trying to, just about everything coming out of the State Department is some sort of fake world where Israel's trying to avoid civilians and they're just trying to get Hamas, and Israel never tried to stop aid from getting into Gaza, and Russia has just invaded Ukraine out of the blue and there was no U.S. involvement. Like, total false reality. Here's from New York Times, for 3 uninterrupted days this week,
they didn't sleep. President
Putin of Russia basked in the attention of other world leaders in the picturesque Russian city of Kazan along the banks of the Volga River.
At least they called him president.
Yeah, they didn't. But does this not? Everything I'm going to read a little more. Every bit of it could just be rephrased. You could just take out Putin and put Biden, put in Trump.
Oh.
No, put in Biden, put in Trump. This is usually just what America does, but because it's what Russia's doing, it's very upsetting. Like having meetings with world leaders at picturesque locations. Well, boy, Biden and Trump and Obama have never done that, right?
I know. They all hold them in actually this subway. That's where they have their meetings.
He beamed continue from New York Times. He beamed as he clinked a champagne flute. Well, Biden, Obama, and Trump never have champagne. With visiting heads of state at a gala dinner. Never once happened from a U.S. president. He stood proudly beside the powerful leaders of China and India. Oh, China, naughty. who chose his country to hold their own first official meeting in more than 5 years. Oh, so another way to phrase that would be they successfully got China and India to come together for the first time in 5 years. Boy, that sounds like at least a first step against war, against death and destruction, against xenophobia. Two countries meeting, that should be a good thing. No, here it's dastardly. And he held court at a roundtable discussions during which he pronounced that the West is facing an irreversible process of decline. So this is his alternate reality, apparently, which basically what makes it...
It's called reality.
I know. What makes it alternate is that it wasn't our president sitting with a champagne flute and world leaders. Very upsetting. The summit, known by the acronym BRICS, had the feel of an alternate reality.
I'm guessing it's because these reporters have never looked like they are not familiar with anything outside of the U.S. like hegemonic model.
Right.
So this is an alternate reality for them. So it's really kind of autobiographical, I feel.
Yeah. That's true. Yeah, this is their alternate reality because they only know U.S. propaganda. I mean, they work at the New York Times. Their brain is New York. Their brain is U.S. Brain is U.S. propaganda. Like they are a robot that spits out propaganda. So what's going on? This doesn't fit with our worldview. Here's a quote from someone from the Carnegie Russia Eurasia Center in Berlin, who's clearly anti-Russia. The BRICS summit was a carefully created parallel universe, a version of the universe which Russia is trying to create because it was excluded from the existing global order. Oh, is Russia excluded from the existing global order?
Look at all the people there.
Or 80% of the world's population lives in countries that have actually not signed on to U.S. sanctions against Russia or to be part of the U.S. proxy war in Ukraine.
Well, not only that, but how many countries are trying to join BRICS right now?
I believe that number was 159 out of 193 countries have signed up for the new BRICS
so it's like,
settlement system.
Yeah, certainly Russia is the outlier, right?
So they're calling this being excluded from the existing global order, yet 159 countries have signed up for this. What?
Do you know what it reminds me? It reminds me of that image, that meme, that GIF or whatever it is of the people on the island and it's sinking and they're like, it's not sinking, it's not sinking, it's not sinking, and it just keeps sinking. And then all of a sudden they're like underwater and they're like boop, 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 boop.
Was a cartoon about climate change, or
yeah.
But it could be for this too. Omar, thank you for the donation. Omar says U.S. kills more people with economic sanctions than they do with their bombs. The BRICS currency can solve the problem. Thank you, Omar, for supporting the show. Michael also supporting the show. Autumn, when the dollar be leaving.
What was that meme I saw a while ago? And it said, somebody asked me what my plans were for the fall, and it took me a second to realize they meant autumn and not the fall of the empire. I feel like that would be my read on the situation too.
What are your plans for the fall? Yeah, it is coming.
This image right here, this is clearly a group. This is just the outliers group. This whole round table discussion here. For those listening to the podcast, it's a photo of the BRICS summit with about 150 world leaders sitting there. Yep, this is getting excluded from the global order. Right. Looks like, apparently, according to the New York Times. So anyway, I'll spare you the rest of the New York Times propaganda, but they're trying to craft a narrative about BRICS that's like, oh, it's this collapsing, meaningless thing, except that most of the world is signing on to it and it's quickly gaining steam. And the U.S. is clearly a collapsing empire, as you can see in the subway behind us. I'm not telling you, this is where they meet, because this is what we have available in the land of the free. All right, let's talk about some more good news about activists against Israel's genocide. Yeah, so what's coming out of the UK, I am like perplexed at the juxtaposition of things. You have people literally having their homes raided because they've put out information about what's going on in Palestine, and then you have this little nugget of hope and beauty that a judge in England has said that he was satisfied that Palestine Action acted out of desperation over Israel's genocide. So what happened earlier this week, on October 23rd, we're recording this on October 25th, 4 Palestine Action activists. If you're not familiar with them, Palestine Action does a lot of direct action where they target like Elbit Systems, for instance, which is a main supplier of weapons and a manufacturer of weapons for Israel. They were on trial for blockading the gates of Elbit's, come on, Brits, Leicestershire. What the hell is this spelling?
I notice you don't do this when you say the Arabic names of other countries. You don't go,
because
what the hell is
no, because I feel like when I read something in Arabic and then I hear somebody say it, I'm like, oh, I can see that. But there's like too many consonants in this word.
Sir Edward Ross in the chat would like us to know it's Leicestershire.
Leicestershire. Okay? Can you?
Oh wait, there's a competing opinion. Nick Hall says it's Leicestershire.
Can you copy and paste the way that this is spelled?
But here's the thing: if you've heard someone in like Liverpool say it, it probably sounds like so.
I'm just saying, cut down on the consonants. Like, what? It's just ridiculous. Anyway. They blockaded the gates of Elbit's drone factory, and they were convicted, but it was only on one charge, and the judge gave them non-custodial sentences. So they were found guilty by district judge. They had earlier been cleared of the charge of obstructing lawful business. They were sentenced to 18 months conditional discharge, which sounds gross, but I think that's just
of observed discharge. We will be watching you as you discharge.
They were ordered to pay £300 in court costs. And by the way, locking on, like locking down to something and blocking it, was only made a criminal offense in England under the Public Order Act of 2023. The judge told them, I am satisfied that you took these steps out of desperation for people trapped in suffering not of their own making. I honestly cannot imagine a judge in the United States saying that sentence. But I am so glad that this guy in England said that sentence. It's really good news. And it obviously means that there's a precedent that's set in terms of the legal ramifications for people who are blocking these factories, these death factories. So some good news.
Every once in a while there's a sane judge out there. Sometimes they slip through or something. Thank you, Anchorman Nerman, for the donation, for supporting the show. Really appreciate it. You guys make this show possible. And if anybody wants to become a member, you can do it at leecamp.net or patreon.com/leecamp. Both places you can support the show, but Super Chat's also wonderful.
I also wanted to bring something up because we're reading this story from the Canary, which is a UK-based outlet.
And they do great work.
They do great work. And one of the things that the defendants, these 4 people, were allowed to do in court was talk about why they took that action.
Which is stopped, usually.
Which, I don't know about British courts. I can't really speak to that. But I know in the US, there have been, multiple dozens of times that I know of personally. And so there must be hundreds where the person on trial can't say why they did the thing.
Like, no, legally is not allowed.
Like, legally you're not allowed to. So then it's like you broke the law. But can I tell you why? No. Right. So then I don't have any defense. Exactly.
Like Chelsea Manning was not allowed to say why she decided it was important to leak. You know, like...
Or any environmental activists.
Yeah. They
can't tell you.
Yeah.
And it's not that it won't be listened to. It's that they literally can't say it in court. So I'm very glad to see that they were allowed to bring this up, because otherwise, how could the judge ever say, I'm satisfied that you acted in desperation? Because he wouldn't know that unless they shared their reasons. Right. It's almost like you have to be allowed to have a defense in a court.
Allowed to defend yourself. What an idea. I mean, yes, this is not to say UK courts are good. They are a banana republic of kangaroos a lot of the time.
So somebody's asking in the chat why they can't say these things in court. It's a great question. Logically, there's no reason they can't say it. But for the purpose of the system, they say that it's not pertinent to the case, right? It's not.
But Cupcake L may be asking why they can't just blurt it out, and it's because the judge can do things like just lock you up if you blurt things out. So
contempt of court.
I could be wrong. Maybe that's not what you're asking, but it does seem like it's like, well, why don't they just say it when they're up on the stand? Well, the judge has said basically, I'll lock you up and you won't get a trial if you do that. So,
Right.
yeah, no, it's absolutely insanity. It's not a fair trial when they don't let people defend themselves. Okay, so I think this is the last thing on Israel. The EU is apparently, this is due to, we found this out by leaked documents have leaked out, showing that the EU has been bending rules to allow trade with Israeli settlements when legally they're not supposed to do that because they have, because of the JCC? Oh, sorry, ICJ.
The JCC.
JCC.
Ruling.
I was thinking ICC.
ICC.
Yeah, because the ICJ ruling requiring countries to end all support to Israeli occupation, and the EU has a policy or bylaws or however it works saying that they will abide by ICJ rulings, but they're not. So it requires them to ban goods imported from Israeli settlements, but they're finding ways around it. Legal experts said that the analysis contradicts the ICJ ruling that states should end all support for the Israeli occupation of Palestine, including the West Bank and Gaza Strip. In the 7-page memo, Frank Hofmeister, made-up name, the director of the EU, they're all made up. The EU Foreign Services Legal Department argued that while European law required the labeling of settlement products, a ban on their import and sale was still up for debate. They just need to be labeled.
This is like the you can't pay for sex, but you can sell it. This is like that loophole.
Yes,
you can't import it, but you can sell it.
The
like,
EU
well, how would I get the things to?
The EU is paying for sex, is what's going on. EU law requires labeling indicating that foodstuffs originate in the West Bank and settlements. Hofmeister's analysis says it is a matter of further political appreciation whether to revisit the EU's policy via the import of goods from the settlements.
We'll put a pin in that.
Francesca Albanese, the UN Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in the Palestinian territories, told The Intercept that the EU's attitude to the ICJ opinion was, quote, legally flawed, politically damaging, and morally compromised.
Oh, that's putting it nicely.
The EU is neglecting its responsibility to uphold international law. This bending of rules for political convenience erodes the credibility of EU foreign policy and betrays the trust of people beyond Palestine. Yeah, I think the credibility of the EU foreign policy has been thoroughly eroded. If
it was ever built up really that well anyway.
It looks like some of the beaches on Florida right now. So yeah, they're bending over backwards to try and break the law to continue to help Israel economically. Thank you for George for the donation supporting the show. George mentions that Democracy Now! This morning said Lula blocked Venezuela from joining BRICS. Do you know why? Was the U.S. pressure to Brazil? I saw this as well. I do not know why. Many are questioning why Lula supposedly led the charge to block Venezuela. I did read an article saying that it had something to do with Brazil worried that their power within BRICS would be eroded if Venezuela joined or something, even though Lula has talked positively about Venezuela joining. So there's a lot of theories floating around, and I don't know the answer, honestly. I don't know why Lula supposedly led the charge to block Venezuela, or how long could that last, that they actually stopped them from joining. I don't know. Okay, shall we get to the Boeing workers?
Sure. So this is more good news. Oh my gosh, I've contributed 2 good news stories. That's a personal best. Okay,
that is incredibly
just
rare.
like to say
Incredibly
that's a personal
rare.
best for me. So the Boeing strike. I also love that the person in this picture.
Oh, did I put up the wrong one? Okay, go ahead.
There's a person in this picture on the Real News that has a watermelon shirt on. So, which means Palestine. So,
maybe they just like watermelon.
The strike continues at Boeing after the workers reject the contract offer. Now, these are Boeing machinists that have been on strike, some 33,000, which is like the largest single business strike. And I also want to point out that this decision to reject that Boeing contract that just happened, I believe this was yesterday, comes after October 2nd, Boeing cut health coverage for the 33,000 of its workers and families as the machinist union continued to go on strike.
33,000 people lost healthcare.
And obviously they did that so that they would all say, oh my gosh, we better go back to work. But they called their bluff and they said, fine, we're going to continue. And this is once again a moment where you're like, why is healthcare tied to a workplace? Because if we had universal healthcare, this would not ever
it wouldn't be a thing.
This would not ever be able to be used as you better, like a gun to your head, go back to work. Otherwise, little Timmy can't get his insulin or whatever, So the fact that they have continued, it's now October 25th. This happened on October 2nd. The fact that they have continued with this strike through that, and now have also rejected the deal that Boeing put on the table that Boeing claimed was their last deal, is huge and powerful and so important. And I'm willing to guarantee you would not be possible without the mutual aid networks that have supported these workers throughout this strike. And I think it's so amazing that these employees have said that they are rejecting this contract with a strong majority vote. And this comes, like, their decision to continue the strike comes less than 2 weeks after Boeing divulged plans to slash 10% of its workforce following years of aggressive spending on an executive enriching stock buybacks. So,
and this is just one of many problems Boeing has had recently.
Yeah, like the doors flying off planes, that's been a big issue. And of course,
the planes that just dove straight into the ground, that was an issue.
Of course, the machinists are the ones who build the planes, and they don't want, obviously, to be building death machines. That's not like their job. And so their concerns, unlike, people who might be striking at like a teacher's strike or something like that, it's not about like just the community and that specific union. This affects anybody who takes a plane, because your plane might just break apart.
Or
mid-air.
You might get stuck in space, as certain astronauts have due to Boeing.
So this is something
Boeing.
This is something that affects people far outside the scope of just these workers, which is also why it's so powerful that they're continuing, because this really is like they're striking not just for themselves, but for all of us who have to use Boeing products because we have to take that flight or whatever. So in that sense, it's also huge. It's such a beautiful display of this kind of solidarity. 64% of those members voted to reject the proposal. That's huge. That's great.
Winter Warlock would like to point out that Canadian healthcare is not free. He pays $20 in parking fees.
I mean, that is kind of ridiculous, the $20 in parking fees.
That's pretty terrible.
They should validate. That's all I'm saying. So the tentative deal included a 35% general wage increase.
I would love to see a 35% general wage increase.
That was a Freudian slip that actually I'm not going to correct. Okay. A 35% general wage increase spread over the duration of a 4-year contract, which comes below the 40% pay boost that the union initially demanded. And so some might think like, oh, well, they're splitting hairs here. And it's like, but they should. Okay. These CEOs are making bank while people are stuck in space and while doors are flying off of airplanes, while they're killing whistleblowers who dare speak up about it. A 40% wage increase, I'd say.
Hasn't been proven yet, but it could be true.
Yeah, no, he just had a terrible accident while shaving and cut his own head off. This is like, they should get that at the very least. And I think that this is great inspiration for all of the workers who are in shit jobs and shit situations, which I'd wager, as it were, are the majority of workers. And so I think that this is also really important inspiration and fuel for those fights as well. Like these workers are not backing down, and we have to show up for them in any way that we can. And yeah.
Ben asked a good question. He said the Russians or Chinese should rescue the Boeing astronauts. Well, fun fact: the U.S. has put forward, the U.S. Congress, in all their wisdom, has passed a law that forbids NASA or the U.S. government from working with Chinese at all. So the Chinese government cannot save the astronauts legally. But beyond that, the last astronauts, just a couple months ago, that were trapped in space were saved by Russians. They came down in Kazakhstan, I believe, and American astronauts were saved by Russia, but it was kind of kept on the DL. It was not, they didn't make a big fuss about it.
To circle back, a couple of the workers said this is workplace democracy and also clear evidence that there are consequences when a company mistreats its workers year after year. Workers across America know what it's like for a company to take and take. And Boeing workers are saying they are fully and strongly committed to balancing that out by winning back more of what was taken from them by the company for more than a decade. I mean, that's just beautiful.
Yeah, stealing from the workers. I mean, this is what the U.S. corporatism is. It's
right.
Corporate America is. It's about exploiting and extracting as much as possible from your workers, while hopefully getting them to think that they're being treated right.
And can I also say that this is why unions are important? Because paying your union dues also means that when shit like this goes down, you get stuff from the union to help you survive during the time of the strike. So, you know, this whole like, oh, well, you're just paying your union dues for nothing. No, that's what health insurance is. Union dues are something that you pay into and you get things out of it, okay? You get this actual financial support when shit hits the fan, which in capitalism, it always does. So the union allows you the feeling, like the feeling of financial, not stability, but like that you can actually go on strike without feeling like you're immediately going to be unhoused. So just wanted to put that little plug in there for unions.
Thank you, George, for the donation. Thank you for supporting the show. Really appreciate it. Okay, let's see. What do I do next? Let's do this next. Real quick, I wanted to talk about it. So I think the problem's been solved, but several days ago, or a few days ago, Cuba's power grid went down for a couple of days. And here is Reuters' propaganda article about Cuba's power grid going down. And it's how it collapsed and what comes next. Cuba's national grid collapsed on Friday, leaving the entire population of 10 million people without electricity, underscoring the precarious state of the communist-run country's infrastructure and economy. Clearly, they're priming you, and they also know that your average reader does not read past the second or third paragraph. So as long as everyone thinks communism is at fault for this, they probably won't. If you kind of equivocate by the third or fourth paragraph, they probably won't notice. Because
burying the lead. That's what That's what New York Times does all the time.
Cuba's electrical grid and oil-fired power plants are obsolete and crumbling, constructed decades ago and scarcely maintained. And because Cuba produces very little fossil fuel of its own,
why does it do that?
With limited refining capacity, it depends almost entirely on imports to assure adequate generation. And almost all of this, or a great much of it, is due to what the U.S. have done to Cuba for generations. It's not like it started yesterday. This has been going on for generations. And literally every time they have a vote at the UN as to whether there should be a continued embargo against Cuba, it's only the U.S. or sometimes the U.S. and Ukraine that vote that there needs to be an embargo against Cuba. There's no reason for it. Longtime ally Venezuela slashed fuel shipments to Cuba by half this year as it struggles to assure supply at home. Why do you think Venezuela is struggling with their oil? That couldn't be connected to the U.S., right? Couldn't be connected to a giant economic war by the U.S. against Venezuela, along with multiple assassination attempts against Venezuela President Maduro. Nothing to do with that. Allies Russia and Mexico have also cut exports to Cuba, forcing the cash-strapped government to seek for far pricier
That was a
fuel on the spot market. But I bet the reason Russia has had a difficulty shipping oil to Cuba couldn't have anything to do with sanctions put on Russia by the U.S., so economic war on Russia by the U.S. So the percentage of this that can be tracked back to the United States is massive. It's massive. And then they say, is the U.S. at fault for Cuba's electrical woes? The United States denies any role in the recent electric grid collapse. And by the way, this is me assuming the U.S. didn't actively hack and destroy Cuba's electrical grid, which they very well might have. But let's assume they didn't. Let's assume this is just economic difficulties in Cuba because the U.S. has had an embargo on them for 900 years. U.S. sanctions, however, do complicate financing. Oh, do they? Of fuel purchases and spare parts for Cuba. They also scare off many oil tankers, forcing Cuba and Venezuela to depend on their own obsolete fleet for transportation. Basically, that answer is yes. The U.S. economic war in these countries is causing a great strife in one way or another. But this is like, not really, basically they come, the U.S. doesn't really play a role, right? Life in Cuba has become extraordinarily difficult. Millions suffer daily without electricity. Of course, Reuters won't mention that in polling, Cubans say they're happier than Americans. And of course, Reuters is not going to mention that they have like a better healthcare system, that they have guaranteed employment, they have guaranteed housing. None of that will get mentioned. It's just people in Cuba hate it. Thank you, Reuters.
Thank you, Reuters.
And thank you, Doug, for the donation and supporting the show. I'm a little late, but wouldn't a multipolar world just lead to inter-imperialist wars? That implies that right now, or 5 years ago when we had U.S. hegemony, there were no wars.
No, I think it implies that a multipolar world would necessitate war. And I think that, or it would necessitate imperialism. And I think the issue, now again, like, I don't like nation states at all, but a nation state isn't necessarily imperialist just through its existence. And China and Russia and, India's obviously not doing great in Kashmir, but these nations have not shown the kind of rabid interest in colonizing and taking over the world that the U.S. has. Now, does that mean that these countries would never come to fisticuffs, as it were? Absolutely not. And the BRICS is not the kind of thing that would be an answer to all problems. It's really just, in my mind, an answer to the U.S. imperialist stranglehold on the global economy, and therefore on the kind of imperialist violence that is exported thanks to its stranglehold on global economy.
And to add to what you said about it, many of these countries have not shown the desire or the aim to just constantly colonize and obliterate other countries. China hasn't dropped a bomb in 40 years, over 40 years. China has one military base outside of China. So you compare that to the U.S. dropping tens of thousands a year bombs, and facilitating the dropping of bombs by Israel and other countries. And it's just kind of no contest. I don't think that having a multipolar world guarantees war. Well, it became hard in my head because I was already thinking about the word war. But I don't think it guarantees war. I think it can actually create a check on things that's greater than with the U.S. The U.S. had no fear, and maybe to some degree continues to have no fear of just obliterating whoever they want. Right. They've been doing that for years and years. And so I think you have a multipolar world, countries start standing up for themselves, they stop, but there's also the U.S. is increasingly fears just obliterating every country that wrongs it.
But there's also, because the U.S. has that stranglehold on the economy, they don't depend on anybody in that economic sense. I mean, certainly do. Like, if China were to all of a sudden say, like, you know what, we're tired of your shit, then the U.S. would collapse very quickly. But the thing is that with a multipolar world, if there's a kind of I don't want to use the word codependency, but like if there's a kind of collaboration there, that also means that the relations are more diplomatic. Now, could those sour? Of course. But the idea is that through a multipolar world, you are putting the diplomacy first in that kind of space, as opposed to what the US has done since its creation, which is put the gun first. So I think that that's the other aspect of that. So I think it's a good question, and there could absolutely continue to be these kind of wars that pop up because of, not because of a multipolar world, but just because of capitalism and the machinations of a sort of colonialism. But the other thing too is to look at how Russia and China are showing up in places like Africa and how African nations feel about them. Like, not just reading, not just seeing how China and Russia feel about it, but when I've talked to people in Africa about how they feel about Russia and China's involvement in their nations, it is generally positive. Like, I have not heard the kind of ire that that African people have for the US. I have not heard that kind of ire for Russia and China. That doesn't mean that everybody loves Russia and China in Africa, but it does mean that there is a significant difference in how those countries are showing up that leaves the people in these nations to feel better about them. So
you haven't seen that kind of ire? Nicholas would like to know if we'll come to Ireland. Sorry, the segue was like right there. I just had to.
Is that a segue?
Oh, it's absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
I would love to come to Ireland. That would be wonderful.
Yes, I would love to come back to Ireland. I've only been there for a few days here and there, so would be wonderful if anyone wants to fund the trip. Okay.
Yes, Lee just needs several cases of Guinness and a pillow. That's all he needs.
That's absolutely true. And I'll even take a boat there.
Actually, that I would love
pillow and Guinness.
I would love to take a boat across the Atlantic.
Oh, and someone else. Let me see if I can find it. Wanted to know if Cuba joined. I can't find who asked it, but someone asked if Cuba was going to join BRICS, and Cuba has been accepted into BRICS. So there's your answer. Lost it.
Which to me even further begs the question why Venezuela wasn't. I'm on board with whoever asked that question, and I'd like to know.
I know. Apparently Brazil vetoed it. So.
Well, I know, but what the hell, man?
I know what the. I agree.
Okay.
Let's do the USDA allowing a listeria outbreak.
So don't eat boar's head meat is the short. That's the short thing. So if you're having a sandwich now,
the brand or from a boar,
I think the boar itself should be fine, depending on where you find it. But the brand is not fine, so don't eat that.
Brand, okay.
Actually, wild boar is very good. Anyway, so just for all those folks, probably not on this podcast, but the folks who are like, "Yay, Biden!" Biden administration officials quietly made, I like that, quietly. This is from CBS News, by the way. This is not from like some lefty rag. Quietly made significant cuts to planned testing for germs across America's food supply. I wonder why that then precipitated a listeria outbreak. So basically, the department said that the cuts...
We really are headed back to Stone Age, aren't we?
Dude. Of course, the USDA is claiming that this had nothing to do with the outbreak of listeria, but yeah, of course they'd say that. The Biden administration has not given an explanation as to why they did this. That's why they did it quietly, because they didn't want to explain themselves. Questions are now being raised about why the Boar's Head plants years of violations did not spur regulators to reverse course. Years of violations. Mold, mildew, and bugs were found in the Boar's Head plant.
Isn't there? But there's a certain amount of bugs and like mice feces that's allowed in hot dogs. You're allowed to have, like, they're allowed to have a little bit.
Really?
Yeah.
I'm glad I don't eat hot dogs.
It's pretty horrific.
But apparently Boar's Head went above and beyond the appropriate amount of, I guess, bugs and fecal matter. So, yeah, their inspectors, when they finally went, found dozens of violations at the plant in Virginia, which is now linked to that nationwide recall of deli meats. The outbreak grew to 57 hospitalizations in 18 states, and were all linked to this one plant in Virginia. This is the largest listeria outbreak since the 2011 outbreak that was linked to cantaloupe. So there's this, I bring this up first because that's disgusting and I don't want y'all to eat any of that. Oh God, Lee, that's disgusting. Rat hair, specifically rat hair. For those listening to the podcast, Lee just pulled up an article that says bugs, rat hair, and poop. How much is legally allowed in the food you eat every day?
And then the article goes on to say, they allow trace amounts of rat feces and maggots and, rat hair.
Oh my God, I'm never eating again.
Delicious. You may be eating more than 40 insect fragments with every teaspoon of black pepper. Huh. And a smidgen of rodent hair. Interesting.
That's disgusting. Here's the thing. Like, if this were all done in a natural, like, beautiful, regenerative farming or something, you'd also have like trace elements of all kinds of shit, like, fly poop and butterfly.
There are flies and they do poop.
Whatever.
That's true.
Butterfly antennae and shit like that. Like, that would be in your food as well. Yeah. But this is like elements of all of this stuff that's found because it's processed and the mold and the mildew. Like, this is stuff that doesn't come from, this beautiful regenerative farming and I have a little piece of a moth wing on my sandwich. Like, no, this is.
Well, I also have I'm a little more okay with the insect stuff because insects are delicious, but it's kind of different than if a rat's pooping in your food.
No. Anything that has been responsible for the outbreak of the plague multiple times and throughout history, I don't really want it near my food. So anyway, I bring that up because the boar's head, like, don't eat that shit, but also, like, the Republicans are supposed to be the ones that chip away at our regulatory agencies, right?
Systems, yeah.
It's supposed to be the other side. And yet the Biden administration, they just do it quietly, defunded the USDA, quietly made significant cuts.
Because I think this is the first time I'm saying this, it's because they're the same party.
It's a good point.
Yeah. First time I've said that.
First time I've heard it.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Biden. Since you brought up politicians and presidents, I didn't. I wanted to quickly show the attempts at October surprises that are now going on right now.
October surprises.
Yeah, try and shift the vote in the last minute thing. Former Sports Illustrated swimsuit model says Trump groped her to show off for Jeffrey Epstein. So fun stuff going on in the halls of power. Unfortunately, I think people on both sides don't seem to care that our presidents are serial sexual assaulters.
Well, if it
both
didn't bother
Biden
them,
and Trump.
If it didn't bother them the first time 4 years ago, why the hell would it bother them now?
I know.
I'm not really.
I know. There's been multiple rape and sexual assault allegations against Donald Trump. Hasn't seemed to really stopped his voters. Same for Biden. Maybe more against Trump, but similar for Biden. And it didn't stop people from voting for him. So apparently that's not an issue for people.
No.
But then I also, since I showed that about Trump, I wanted to show Kamala Harris.
Oh, this is amazing.
Saying that.
Speaking of meat.
Speaking of meat, yes. Here's her answer to whether people. What about people who don't want to vote for her because she's supporting genocide? It's basically, of course, CNN won't phrase it that way. That's basically what they're asking.
What do you say to voters who are thinking about supporting a third-party candidate or staying on the couch, not voting at all because of this issue?
Listen, I am not going to deny the strong feelings that people have. I don't know that anyone who has seen the images who would not have strong feelings about what has happened, much less those who have relatives who have died and been killed. And I know people, and I've talked with people. So I appreciate that. But I also do know that for many people who care about this issue, they also care about bringing down the price of groceries.
What?
So the answer is, what about the price of chicken? What do you say to people?
What do you say to people who are tired of seeing
genocide?
Infants in body bags? Well, I'd tell them, look, what are you having for dinner? That's what I would ask them. I would ask them.
Listen, sure, you're voting for genocide. I absolutely am not going to decrease the number of children that are murdered, but chicken prices. Don't forget that. Let's talk about that.
This is exactly, I mean, I don't know that Kamala Harris has answered a question ever that I've seen. Like, I don't know that I've never seen her actually answer a question.
True. No, that's not true. She has adequately and clearly said
I'm not changing my policy on Israel.
That one, and that she supports fracking.
That's fair.
She has completely flipped on that, but she is certain now she supports fracking.
Oh, and she also has said, I recant that. She has actually also said that she's not for universal health care. So that's true.
Yes. So if it's horrific, she actually is quite clear on these things.
Yeah, that's true.
But just in that one statement, that was like 40 seconds. That one statement, she said, I'm not going to deny people's strong feelings, which is a way of answering without answering. It doesn't. If you ask me, hey, are you opposed to animal rape? I'm not going to deny people have strong feelings.
Do you know what that is? That's the classic liberal. I'm sorry, you're mad.
I'm sorry you feel that way.
Like I'm not sorry, but I'm sorry that you're feeling a little pissy about it.
And then she also did the completely passive, doesn't even say the word Israel. I bet people are upset if they've lost family members who have died. How'd they die? They tripped and fell.
I also
tripped
lost.
And fell in Gaza.
Like, you went on a hike and they just didn't find their way. They took the wrong trail. Like, it's
yeah, they took the path into genocide is what happened. So yeah, both are presidential candidates. One's running around sexually assaulting people. The other one supports genocide. They both support genocide, but is saying don't worry about the genocide because chicken. So that's your election. Have fun with that, folks.
Yeah.
All right. Since I am leaving for 2.5 weeks, I am going to be uploading some videos. So don't give up on me. But I will throw in one extra story here real quick. Oh, go ahead.
I also just wanted to say she also didn't mention how she was going to bring down the price of chicken. So that's also not even an answer for the question that wasn't even asked.
I bet the answer is allow more rat turds in it.
Yeah, exactly. We're going to up it to 40% rat turd.
So there's an update on this story. I have brought this story before, but even CNN is now there's more and more studies. Studies keep being done. They keep more information comes forward. And yet again, we see that Iceland, much of the country has switched to a 4-day work week, decreasing the number of hours worked. And
they're miserable. Right?
And here's how it turned out. They're actually doing better than most of Europe. Iceland, again, from CNN, this is not some tiny little blog. Iceland's economy is outperforming most European peers after the nationwide introduction of a shorter working week with no loss in pay. So shorter working week, but same amount of pay. That's the key point. According to research released Friday, between 2020 and 2022, 51% of workers in the country have now accepted the offer to work fewer hours, 4-day week, decreasing down to about 36 hours from a 40-hour work week. And yet they're producing more than they used to. Because when people are healthy and happy and have the bandwidth, they actually work better. So in those 4 days they have, getting paid the same as 5 days, they're more productive. And every study keeps showing this. There's been small studies in Britain, which have also shown this. And
in fact, every time they try this, it works well.
Every time they try this is great. And yet you think you would just go, wow, there's the answer. It gives everybody a better life. Done. All of America. 4-day work weeks if you have 5 days and same amount of pay. Yet no one's doing it. And I'd say there's a few reasons for this, but one of the sneaky ones I feel is they don't want people having that much free time.
No,
because then people start reading, they start thinking,
or getting together and talking about things.
They get together over a cup of coffee and they start talking about how shit's going. So the key is to have us locked in these endless jobs, in this endless wage slavery.
Well, yeah, and the fact that a lot of people need like 3 wage slavery jobs to make ends meet. You don't have time to sit down and talk to yourself, much less other people, like in a community organizing setting.
Right. So, but there's the data, and it keeps happening again, over and over again. Okay, folks, like I said, I'm leaving for 2.5 weeks. I'm going to be uploading videos from Tibet, and I know from Tibet, and I so don't think I won't be putting out content and everything. So please check back.
I'm going to try to hang out with y'all.
Eleanor is hopefully going to hang out one morning. We'll probably it'll be live on YouTube and some of the other platforms. We don't have a way at the moment to make it live on Locals, so it probably will have to upload on Locals and Rumble afterwards, which you'll still get it. But anyway.
So I hope that you're ready to just hang out with me a few times and not Lee. It's going to be weird. We're all going to feel a little awkward to begin with. But you know what?
It's like when your mom would go away for a week and you were just left with your stepdad. You were like, oh my God, it's just me and him.
It's going to be like a teen cotillion. It's going to be like a little awkward at first, but then after a while, we're going to be like John Travolta and Olivia Newton-John. So it's going to be great. We're going to have fun.
It's gonna work out. Big John, thanks for the donation over on Rumble. Big John says like and support censored media. And also for those of you on Rumble and Locals, if you aren't also subscribed on YouTube, it'd be a good time to do it. youtube.com/momentofclarity will get you there. So you can find out when Eleanor's going live. And like I said, going to be uploading videos. And check out my new podcast, Just Comedy. I'll have episode 5 coming out soon. And yeah, thank you guys. Thanks for all the support, and see you later. Keep fighting.
Well, brother, I salute you, though, man. You're one of the few that bring together this tremendous artistic talent and still be in such deep solidarity with oppressed people.
It's an honor to be here because I'll tell you, Lee, you have one of the funniest shows on television, bar none.
It's an enormous pleasure to be here. While I was waiting, I was leafing through your wonderful book.
And the same to you. I love your show. Be happy to come back anytime.
Lee, this is one of the great honors of my long career, just to be in the same earth with you.
I'm sure.
We're just so blinded. We have so many blinders on because our society doesn't want us to know things. And so it takes shows like your show, and
it is clearly designed to eradicate.
Hey, good to see you.
Hey, Jill, how are you? Julian, thanks for joining me. Honor to have you, brother.
Consumerism is a theory that people should behave this way to help each other. It's not.
Mr. George Galloway, thank you so much for joining me in these dark times.
Always a pleasure, my friend.
Thank you so much, Lee, for having me on. Keep fighting. Ha ha.